When I started this build, I thought to myself, this'll be easy. But it wasn't. But you might as well see my attempt.
Anyone would think they were going for like a gas-tight seal or something, eh? Like a glove. Anyway. Oh folks, it's not looking good. Actually.
So if at first you don't succeed, destroy all evidence you ever tried.
Hi. So I have an interesting challenge ahead. Challenge for me because I really want to weld, and I'm putting a restriction on myself that I can't. Basically to put myself in the shoes of people out there who don't have access to a welder or simply haven't learnt the skill yet. So what I have, so I've drawn something up in the computer, and I cannot take any credit at all for this design because it's actually, let's turn this around so I can see what I'm looking at. This design was made by another bloke on YouTube whose name I cannot remember off the top of my head, but I'll put his name there. So check this guy out. He's the original bloke who made this stove. When I sort of had a first crack at this and fell flat on my face, I'm like, okay, let's go out there and see what works. And so I came across this design, and I really like it because I think I'll be able to not just burn rice husk in it, because rice husk for me in Australia is basically a non-event. It's not something that I can find readily available, and I think that's the case for most Australians. But something that is available is other forms of biomass, like sawdust. I'm going to try burning sawdust in it. If I can get my hands on some wheat husk, I'd love to see if that would burn in it. And but anyway, so a huge part of this build are these templates. What a template allows you to do is to basically build something before you've built it. See how it fits together, make adjustments, because it's a lot easier to work with this than it is to, and less expensive than to go cutting this up and wasting it. So the idea of a good template is it gives you a better feel for your layout and your material use. So I can lay all my pieces out on this piece of steel and get the maximum usage out of it. It also means that it's repeatable, and if you want to make more than one, you've already done the hard work and you can come back to it. There's nothing stopping a person from scratching out these dimensions straight onto your steel. That's fine. But if you ever wanted to do it again, it's worth making a template. I've used core fluting, and this has given me an advantage in that I've been able to work out where a lot of my holes and things are drilled, and lay parts on top of other parts, line up my centers, and punch through. And it will hopefully save me a lot of mucking around as this build progresses, and enable me to put this together easily. So I'm going to leave some detailed pictures of all of these templates for you, so that you can pause and get the measurements that are off them and write those down. All the measurements that are on these templates, providing all your lines are square and parallel, will enable you to recreate these templates quite simply. Just follow the measurements. Providing I always start with a center line and then work out from there and make sure that everything is square to my center line. And that's the easiest way to work this stuff out. Okay, so this part makes the main body that will be the outer part of the stove, the bit you see. And you need 4 of these pieces, and it contains a fold, a 10mm fold. And there's also a hole down here for the air intake. So now is a good time to scratch these holes in.
Now, a grinder will make short work of this job, but a guillotine will make shorter. And that's why I'm using it. If you don't have a guillotine, don't worry about it. It's not essential. A grinder with a slitting disc on it will be just fine.
There's the body.
Now, this is the first mistake of many that I make on this build. Basically, I go ahead and fold all these parts up now, and I should have left them flat, clamped them together, and drilled all my holes. Everything would have been the same. It would have been much easier to keep everything aligned, but, you know, hindsight. Now, I am aware that most of you out there watching me don't own a folder or have access to one, and it's okay. You can still achieve all this by simply scoring the material with a cutting disc. Lightly just grind all the way along the fold mark, not all the way through, but just weakening it to the point where you can put it over an edge and hammer the fold. It will actually, it's quite simple. It's a little bit time consuming, and that's the only reason why I'm not doing it, is because I have a folder and I would be crazy not to use it.
That goes there. That goes there. Yeah, so in between those two. So between this line and that line, you need to drill a bunch of holes. Now, if I had actually done that, drilled between those 2 lines and not accidentally gone up to the next line, I perhaps would have ended up with a functional stove and not a blast furnace. Just making that observation now while editing. To let air come through. And now a little time-saving trick is clamp all your material together, just like this, and drill through all of them at once. They're all going to be uniform that way, which also means if you stuff up your pattern, you're going to have a uniform stuff up.
All I can say is that if you're not familiar with your drill before starting this job, by the end of it, you will be quite intimately acquainted with it. Over 180 holes here. I had blisters upon my blisters. The first 3 layers of holes from the top were 8mm. That got a bit hard, so I switched to a 5mm drill. They're all 15mm apart on a 15mm grid, and basically that's all you need to know. Now, the burn chamber is basically identical to the main body, except this time I did it right and I screwed them all together before folding. The hole pattern is again a 15mm grid, and the holes in this one are 6mm, and I screwed up there. Jumping forward in time, this is what the burn chamber looks like once screwed together and everything done. I've misplaced the footage of me doing that, so I'm just inserting this from the future. This is one of the more interesting templates. You use the same template 4 times in a square pattern to create this shape. And then once you've scored all the fold lines with your grinder and weakened it, you will be able to play metal origami and create a small pyramid with its top chopped off. I'll demonstrate how that's done now. So you center punch the middle as a pivot point, and then rotate the part around a center punch mark to discover that I screwed up. Now, making sure that there was adequate material to accommodate the template, we center punch the middle and go again. Simply rotate it 90 degrees. Go again. And just keep tracing around. And that is how this template works. I found the easiest way to get into these tight areas is to just drill the material out. I'm using a small drill there, just a spot where the larger drill needs to start. And I'm just going to blow through that. A stealth drill probably would have been better, a little bit neater, but I just needed to remove that material in there. It would have been very hard to get a grinder in. Once you've cleared out these areas, you can then use the grinder to score your fold marks, remembering not to grind all the way through. You just want to weaken the material so you can bend it by hand or with a hammer or whatever you've got available at the time. And there you have it, as easy as that. Now all the holes in this plate, ashtray, are 7mm, and I didn't mark out any of the holes. Basically, I just started in the middle and drilled 3 and then went a little bit down and drilled 4 and just kept incrementally increasing the hole numbers until it was all filled up. I was sort of over center punching and scribing at this stage. Once you're happy with it, you can screw it together. This part really needs no explanation. Yeah, it's really that simple to make. Now we're getting to the meat and potatoes of this build, which is the inner riser. You need 2 of these parts, and you'll need to drill some holes in them to accept some 3/8 threaded rod or whatever you have handy. I used 3/8, so these 2 holes were drilled out to 10mm. Try to be as consistent as you can. It'll just make things go together smoother later on. And make sure your folds are 90 degrees, like really try to be accurate. It'll make the assembly of these parts so much smoother as the build goes on. You won't be reaming out holes of a drill, and it'll save you a bit of time mucking around. That'll get screwed together. Let's move on. Now the outer halves of the riser are basically identical to the inner halves. They're just a little bit larger so they fit around each other. That's what they look like when they're all cut out and drilled. And this is what the part looks like completed. Again, accuracy and care taken when building this will be rewarded with an easier assembly. So, yeah. These parts are now ready to be screwed together. And yeah, let's keep going. Now these are all the bits for the frame. They're the support parts for the legs. And they're the only bits you'll need to notch. The notch is just a 25mm, leaving that little bit of a tab on the end, so you've got something to screw to. And it's really a simple process of putting it together. Just get it square. It's very useful to have a clamp to sort of hold it in position and just screw it together with self-tapping metal screws. It's easy as that. And repeat. Providing all your pieces have been cut to the same length, this should be very straightforward. The support bar that I'm screwing in now is 520 mil down from the top. That's measuring from the top edge of the frame to the top edge of the support. And now we repeat the process again. I'm being lazy here and using the first frame that I made to mark out the position of the support bracket. Probably not the best practice, but at least that way if they're both wrong, they're both identically wrong. To hold the whole frame square, I'm using this 0.3mm galvanized sheet. And I love that noise. Can't help myself. Once you have your two frames made, you can screw the remaining support brackets in and turn the whole thing into a box. This is probably the fiddliest part of the whole arrangement. Again, a clamp is really a necessity for making this a simple task. I need to get the bench flat. There we go. This is where a second person would have been handy to sort of help hold that up. I managed to get it. And with this final screw, that's the frame done. Of course, it's the hardest one. And there's the frame. Now what's going to hold those legs parallel with each other is going to be the sheet metal. And I'm going to put some ribs in that now on my Jenny to strengthen it and take that wobble out. This is my Metal Master Jenny, or bead roller as they're also known. And it's the newest addition to the workshop. And I'm still sort of getting used to it, but man, I've only ever used the hand-powered ones in the past, and this thing is just luxury. So nice. All up, I made 3 of these parts. These sheet metal covers also work as windbreaks, and you really don't need to use what I'm using to do this. I did consider screwing corrugated iron onto the side of it, but I sort of wanted a more attractive stove, and I had the gear to do that, so, you know, any excuse to use a new toy. But you could use corrugated iron, you could have used fibro cement sheeting, obviously non-asbestos. Anything that's non-flammable would work really well to brace the frame and provide a bit of a windshield. By just putting a few creases in the sheet metal, it's made it quite rigid. It's still got a little bit of flex to it, but it's taken all that wobble out of it. No more wobble. Now at this stage of the build, all you need to do is screw one of these sheets to the back of the frame. Just pick a side and tack it on. You're going to need access to the rest of the frame for the remainder of the build because you're going to be screwing stuff in. So yeah, just get one on there. It's going to hold it all straight and enable you to keep going. Now that the frame's assembled and standing, we can move on to the assembly of the actual stove. We're going to start with the main body parts, and what I'm doing is making sure that these air intake pipes fit through the holes that I've drilled down the bottom. The holes that you're seeing there are marked on the template. I've used 25 NB, which is nominal bore pipe, for my air intakes. The pieces are 130 mm long, and I used a 24mm hole saw to cut these initial holes. Normally a hole saw will cut slightly oversized, and I was sort of hoping for a nice tight fit. And as it turns out, the hole saw cut a perfect 24mm hole, which is really annoying because now I've got to open them all up again. But that's okay. It means that each hole I will be able to guarantee that it's a nice slip through fit. You don't want it too loose, but you do want it to sort of stay there like that. Now when I got to this stage of the build, I realized that these folds had a little bit of a part of the lip that protruded past the top, and that would prevent me from getting the whole thing to sit flat when I screwed it together. So I'd quickly knock those off with the cutting disc so that when I assembled it now, it's sitting really nice and flat on the bench, which is kind of important. And it's just a matter of screwing it together now. I pre-drill holes in the fold just to sort of make this task a little bit easier. I'm only using 4 screws per side. And if you don't own a clamp, you should really get yourself one. I named mine Jed. Jed Clamp It.
Now because fuel's going to be flowing down through here, I'm going to be chopping off the excess screw that's coming through. I'm just going to do that with the grinder really quick. And that's just going to help prevent any bridging of the fuel as it works its way down. And it shouldn't affect the holding strength of the screws.
And now we're finally getting somewhere. If I can get it in. There we go. So flipping the whole thing upside down just gives you a nice flat base. It's going to keep everything in line. And just pull it out a bit from the edge so you can get access to the main body to screw it to the frame. And to begin with, all you're wanting to do is get enough screws in there just to hold it in position so that you can flip it then the right way around and put the rest of the screws in. I'm coming in for a better shot so you can see what I'm doing now. There you go. I'm just starting to get a real sense for how big this thing is. It's actually stands very tall in the saddle, and it's fine for me because I'm like 6 foot something. But you might want to consider making the legs a little bit shorter. And just tap it in, Happy. Just tap it in. And there we go. Now we get to assemble the inner Bernie bit. These parts you can just screw together however you like. I've used 3 screws per panel to hold it in place. That seems to be working just fine. You don't need to trim the screws off on this one because there's no fuel going to be flowing down on the inside. There's just going to be fire racing past it.
Okay.
Now these 2 parts, once screwed together, create the inner part of the riser. There are 2 holes drilled in each part which will accept some threaded rod. And that's just going to help align the inner and the outer part together. I'm pre-drilling the holes here just for easy assembly. Now, I also deburred the back of those holes off camera just so that the fit was nice and tight. Pre-drilling those holes just makes the whole assembly task so much simpler. And that's that. Now these tabs are what connect the burn basket to the riser. I made those off camera, but they're very simple. They're only 50mm squares with a fold down the middle. I overfolded these parts and I ended up having to tap them back. So they really need only the slightest kick in them.
Have you finished yet? No? A few more taps? It's not quite perfect? You're a perfectionist, Chook. It's never going to be perfect.
So now for the secondary, third-andary, fourth-andary, I'm not sure what you'd call this, but they're air intakes and they're an essential part of the design. And they just fit through those holes nicely. They're the ones you saw me opening up before on the body. Now, in order to hold these into position, I'm going to have to get a little bit creative because I'm not using a welder. What I'm actually going to do is mark their position once I'm happy with them with a Nikko. I'm just doing a quick test fit with the basket now, just to see how it sort of sits and check gaps and sort of visualize where the fuel's going to be sitting and have I got enough room. And it's just a sanity check. So I'm going to be marking it with a Nikko, a permanent marker, and then drilling and using 2 nails as like dowel pins on either side of the material to hold it in position. Another simple way of doing it would be to use 2 pipe clamps on either side. I think stainless steel would be the go if you were going to use pipe clamps, but for me, nails were sort of a simple low-tech way of holding these pipes in position, and it worked quite well. So the holes you see me drilling here are to accept 2 nails that will be 90 degrees from each other, and they are going to be what holds these bits of pipe captive. So if you can imagine, 1 nail on the inside of the stove and the other one rotated but on the outside of the stove, and sort of sandwiching the steel in between. It won't be able to go in or out. It's important that you drill a hole that is fairly a good tight fit for the nail or whatever you're going to use. This will all make sense in a few minutes when you see it installed in the stove. And now basically, with 1 nail already installed in the pipe, we just slip it through and fix it by nailing the other one from behind. And that's quite firm now. It's really not going anywhere, and we just repeat that another 3 times, and that'll be all the pipes installed. And that's what it looks like from the back. Now what you need to do is work out roughly where your threaded rod's going to sit. I just sat it all in there and marked it for texture, and then came out and drilled and tapped the holes to accept the 3/8 rod in this case. This is the rustiest 3/8 tap on YouTube. There it is. Just a quick test fit. I'm having to hold the tap on a bit of an angle so it all sort of lines up and goes through. It's a bit ugly, but it works. And using the drill just to run that threaded rod in, oh, time saver. Be there for hours twisting it by hand if not.
Okay, so the fit in there was really quite good. Potentially I could have notched these so that they fit inside some of these holes, but that is just pressed in there, and it's the pressure of the walls pushing in seems to be holding it there quite nicely. And we'll see what happens when it gets hot, how much these bow and carry on. But the gap's nice and even around the bottom. It's sort of what we're looking for. There's no real, we're minimizing snagging points that would create bridging with the fuel. And I think I'm going to call that done for now. And of course this is just sitting down on those air intake pipes, which are sort of even. If you have a look down in there. That's what we're going for.
Now the bits that you're seeing me make here, you will actually have already made. I gave you the correct number in the cut list way back yonder when we were talking about the frame. So I just sort of messed up and skipped a step. So anyway, I've made that right now. And to work out the position of the ashtray support, which is predominantly what these two bits do, is hold that in position. Just put it all where it needs to be and mark it. I'm just lining it up with the body underneath, and that is all there is to it. It's a very foolproof way of working out its position.
I need to attach a bit of rod to this before I throw it in there.
Just drilling and tapping some holes to accept the 3/8 rod. What I'm about to do with this tap is a little bit brittle. It's a good thing it's imperial and not metric. A metric tap would have folded in seconds. Oh, it's brittle. Gives me chills just watching it now. The only thing I need to point out here is that make sure that before you install the support that you put the ashtray or jiggler, as I'm calling it, in position. Otherwise, once it's all together, it ain't going to fit. I'm just doing a test fit. It jiggles nicely. So there's really not much left to do now. I'm screwing the internal riser onto the internal burn plate. I guess that's what I call it. And pretty much it's just the final assembly and a splash of paint, a few little things, and this is nearly ready to go. So the outer riser's job is to separate the fuel from the inner riser, basically to try to get it away from the heat so that it doesn't catch fire before you want it to. And unfortunately, it didn't really do a good job. I needed to pack insulation in there now, either some rock wool or make a base to cap the bottom so that you could fill it full of ash or perlite or whatever you've got, sand, just something to prevent the heat from radiating through and catching the fuel on fire before you want it to. The whole stove would have ran so much nicer if I had done that. The last of the finishing touches are pretty straightforward, and I didn't bother recording them. I screwed the rest of the panels on and gave it the whole frame a lick of paint. Final step for me was to just put a bit of wooden dowel on this threaded rod to act as a bit of a heat shield. And we are ready for a test run. So for this test burn, I unfortunately didn't have a whole lot of rice husk left from the original build. I wasted a lot of it trying to get that other stove to run. So to make up for the lack of rice husk, I've mixed in a bit of kitty litter, paper kitty litter with the rice husk, and now I'm topping it up with sawdust. So I really need to get some more rice husk, but the stuff is like, it's really expensive. Something that I've come to realize with you guys is you don't turn up to see my awesome fashion. It's about the stoves, it's not about my fashion. Anyway. Lighting the stove is fairly straightforward. You just get some cardboard, set it on fire and drop it down the tube. And help it down because there's lots of threaded rod and obstructions, but you know, just get it down there and it'll get going. Oh, instant fog. There we go. think that's starting to take now.
I'm not particularly well known for my fashion sense either.
No, we're a perfect couple. I think that's actually going now. Wow. Oh, wow. Okay, this thing is going nuts. Ooh, all right. Nothing in this pot. I just want to see what happens when you put something on top, whether or not you get a lot of... No? That's pretty good. It's always that fine balance of... Okay, that's proper nuts. I am literally lost for words at this point. It just kept on ramping up, getting hotter and hotter. I'm like, how is someone supposed to cook on this? It was around about now I realized that I'd put this thing way too close to that PowerPoint. As it turns out, though, it only got warm and I kept a close eye on it and everything sort of turned out all right. But yeah, I had no idea this thing was going to create the heat that it did. I sort of wanted a stove and not a blast furnace, but I'll take it. Yeah. So, yeah, I was after a stove, and it appears I've made a blast furnace. Where's my ruler? Y'all remember that insulation I talked about? I'm starting to see the ugly effects of not having that in there now. The smoke that you see is the fuel catching on fire just because it's touching the riser. Pretty soon it all starts to catch on fire, and this experiment sort of was cut short because of that. And as you can see also lots of orange sparks that I'm now beginning to run on the sawdust. Pretty much all the rice husk is gone. And but to try to keep things going, I started grabbing dirt and throwing it on top of the fuel to try to smother it out, just to keep it going as long as I could. And that sort of worked, but insulation, perlite, sand, rock wool, something, fibro cement sheeting probably packed down in there would work, just to try to slow down that heat. Obviously, the better the insulation, the less chance this is going to happen. And I need to go back and experiment with that and try to get that right with this build. I think we're going to call this video part 1. And yeah. In part 2, I'm going to try to fix some of these problems. So I'm really liking the idea of trying to smelt aluminium with this thing. Just got to work out a way to do that. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe, leave a comment, all that good stuff. It really helps me out. I'll see you in the next one.